All right, welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the mechanics behind the shrinking dollar, breaking down a phenomenon that essentially acts as an invisible tax on all of our wallets. If you've been watching the markets, tracking the consumer price index, or honestly, even just looking at your own monthly grocery receipts, you know exactly what I am talking about. We are moving past the basic everyday headlines today to truly understand the macroeconomic forces driving this whole shebang. We're going to look into how supply chain shocks, shifts in the M2 money supply, and central bank policies directly impact your purchasing power. And more importantly, what it fundamentally means for your financial strategy. Let's get right into it. To set our baseline, let's establish a really classic illustration of purchasing power using a super simple transaction. Imagine you go out and buy a standard classic burger today, and you hand over exactly $2. It's a straightforward exchange of value, right? You get a physical good, and the restaurant captures your $2 of baseline purchasing power. Now, let's fast forward exactly 5 years into the future. You execute that exact same transaction for that exact same standard burger, but suddenly, the price is $3. This is the perfect moment to recognize the wild nature of fiat currency. You see, our money doesn't actually have any intrinsic value. Its worth is entirely dictated by economic policies, circulating supply, and time. And over those 5 years, those underlying macroeconomic factors have absolutely shifted. So it begs the question, did that burger actually get any better? Well, no. The inherent utility of the physical good remains completely unchanged. The burger didn't suddenly acquire premium Wagyu beef or artisan preparation. What we're observing here isn't a shift in the product's value, but a degradation in the currency's purchasing power. The specific utility of the item is identical, but the currency required to acquire that utility has weakened. It takes more paper to get the same beef. And that phenomenon, right there, is inflation. It is the gradual increase in the prices of goods and services over time. Economists and central banks measure this degradation using highly tracked metrics like the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, and the Producer Price Index. So the crucial point is that these metrics highlight a very strict inverse relationship. As aggregate prices rise across a basket of goods, the actual purchasing power of your baseline currency falls. The exact same nominal amount of money yields a lower real-world return. Think of $100 bill's purchasing power like a fully charged battery. Today, that battery has the output required to secure, let's say, 10 specific items. But over time, standard inflationary targets naturally drain that battery. When you go back to the market a few years later, that identical $100 bill might only have the energy to secure 8 or 9 of those exact same items. The nominal amount, literally the number 100 printed on the paper, remains completely identical, but its real-world power has significantly diminished. Section 1, why does inflation happen? The 3 main engines. Okay, let's dive into this and look at the forces driving these continuous price hikes. The first engine is what economists call demand pull inflation. This typically occurs in a booming economy where employment is high and consumers just have excess discretionary income. When aggregate demand for goods and services outpaces the capacity of global supply chains to actually produce them, you get a massive bottleneck. You have an influx of capital aggressively chasing a limited, inelastic supply of products. In response to this supply-demand imbalance, businesses naturally pull their prices upward to find a new market equilibrium. Let's move to and see how this builds with our second engine, which operates from the complete opposite end of the supply chain, cost-push inflation. This happens when the overhead required to manufacture goods experiences a sudden shock. Think about geopolitical conflicts causing massive oil spikes, or critical supply chain bottlenecks driving up the cost of raw materials, or even tight labor markets forcing wages higher. Producers rarely absorb these compressed margins themselves. Instead, they just push those new elevated overhead costs directly down onto the consumer by raising the final retail price. So bringing that all together, we have demand pull and cost push inflation. But the third, and honestly often the most structural engine, is monetary expansion. This is driven by expansionary monetary policy. When central banks want to stimulate growth, they use tools like quantitative easing or drastically lower interest rates, which effectively increases the M2 money supply. They are literally expanding the amount of currency in circulation. When you flood the system with new capital, but the actual economic output of goods and services remains static, you devalue the currency already in circulation. It simply takes more of those diluted dollars to buy the exact same asset. Moving right along to Section 2, the double-edged sword. Is inflation good or bad? This leads to a fascinating dynamic in central banking. You might be wondering, why do institutions like the Federal Reserve actively target a 2% inflation rate rather than just aiming for 0? Well, it comes down to a concept called the velocity of money. And this brilliantly illustrates how a low, predictable rate of inflation acts as an economic catalyst. It disincentivizes hoarding cash because citizens know their money will slightly devalue if it just sits idle under a mattress. This forces capital into investments, equities, and immediate spending, which really greases the wheels of the broader economy. However, once inflation breaches that target and runs hot, it becomes intensely destructive. It outpaces economic growth, completely destroying wage gains, aggressively eroding savings, and making baseline necessities totally unaffordable. Section 3. The real-world impact. Your daily coffee. Let's apply this directly to the math of everyday consumption to see how it hits your wallet. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how a daily cup of coffee that costs $5 today gets pushed to $5.50 after just a single year of high 10% inflation. But what's truly vital to understand here is the brutal nature of compounding inflation. If central banks fail to cool the economy and that rate compounds year over year for a decade, that $5 coffee quickly approaches $13. The drink itself hasn't changed at all, but the mathematical reality of compound devaluation has drastically altered what it costs to maintain your normal standard of living. This brings us to a really crucial distinction between nominal wages and real wages. Your nominal wage is just the number printed on your paycheck, but your real wage is what that paycheck can actually buy when adjusted for inflation. Actually, scratch that. It's more like your real wage is your true survival metric. If your nominal salary stays perfectly flat over a year where inflation runs at 6%, your real wages have just been slashed. You are objectively poorer. Inflation dictates the true value of your liquidity, the real cost of your living expenses, and ultimately, your ability to compound wealth for your future. Which leaves us with this final, highly actionable question. We know that fiat currency is basically designed to slowly lose its purchasing power. It is a fundamental feature of modern monetary policy. So how will you choose to hedge against it? Will you transition your capital into hard assets, explore equities that outpace inflation, or maybe leverage instruments like Treasury inflation-protected securities? Moving from a generalized fear of inflation to a targeted financial strategy is the absolute key to preserving your wealth. Your money is losing power. How will you protect it? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep analyzing those markets, and I'll see you next time.